So listen to this. In the late 90s, there was a Nike commercial that went a bit something like this. What if you asked God to make you the best football player in the world and he was actually listening? Then, as the words faded away, they simply showed you a clip of Ronaldo Fenomeno scoring against Compostela without any context. Because just looking at it, he knew exactly what they meant. In reality, everyone always knew that there's never been an example of a wonder kid who was as obviously destined to become an all-time great as much as Ronaldo. It's extremely common to focus on the injuries and the what-ifs of Ronaldo's career, you know, the negative side, but we're talking about a kid who by the age of 20, before he had won the Ballon d'Or, before he had even arrived at Barcelona, had already played 115 matches and scored 103 goals. I could show you a 5-second clip of him at age 16 and it would still somehow be enough to convince some of you that he was the greatest of all time. That's how people fell in love with him, that's what made him world famous before he was even old enough to drive a car. And that's what I want to focus on. Focus on the time before the tragedies when Ronaldo's legacy was yet to be defined. And it all started with a young buck-toothed kid skipping class to attend some futsal trials at his local club, Valcade. And the funny thing is, back then, he was yet to realize how much of a prodigy he really was, so when he noticed that there were 50 kids there for the trials, he convinced himself he had no chance at making it, so he told everyone he was a goalkeeper, because, well, there were so few of them, surely they'd have to give him a spot. And it was right, though it quickly became obvious to everyone, including himself, that he was no goalkeeper. After a few matches on the bench, while losing 2-0 to Vasco da Gama, his coach decided to just throw the new kid up front and see what happened, and the result was 4 goals for Ronaldo and a stunning comeback against a team they should have no chance playing against. Obviously after that, he became the team's star player, and by the end of his first season, he had scored 166 goals, and there was even one match where out of his team's 12 goals, 11 were scored by him. As you might imagine, by then, Ronaldo wasn't doubting his skills anymore. In fact, he was completely convinced that his calling was football. He even used to say it was his first love, and so, completely head over heels by the age of 12, with his parents going through a divorce and Ronaldo acting out a bit, he told his mom he had quit school to focus on football. She was furious. She told him he would have no future, that he'd grow up to be a nobody, but as much as she tried, she quickly realized there was nothing she could do. She worked a 12-hour shift at a diner. There was just no way for her to make sure he wasn't skipping class, and after all, there were far worse things for a kid to do after going through some tough times than playing football. And well, as crazy as it may sound, that was the best decision of her life. Over the next 2 years, his fame grew exponentially. The story of the kid blessed by the gods began making the rounds. At 13, he moved to Social Ramos. At 14, to São Cristóvão, where he even got to play with the under-20s, despite being 6 years younger than everyone around him. And after that, there was just no way around it. The big clubs arrived in town. To begin with, he got a trial at Flamengo, which actually sent him over the moon as it was his childhood club, and he actually did really well. They even called him up for a second trial, but they refused to pay for his bus tickets, and he just couldn't afford to keep on paying for them as he took 4 different rides to get to their training center, so he just quit. Regardless, his journey obviously didn't end there. Soon after, 2 agents swooped in and purchased the player's rights for a mere $7,000 and began looking for a club to sign him. Botafogo rejected him, São Paulo refused to pay the $25,000 they had asked for, and so for a while he remained at São Cristóvão, and it could have lasted a lot longer if not for one little detail. Guess who was the first team coach at São Cristóvão? None other than Jairzinho, the 1970 World Cup star player and champion. Who better to spot one of the greatest strikers of all time than one of the greatest strikers of all time? So yeah, Jairzinho made sure to personally recommend Ronaldo to his former club Cruzeiro, and after watching the 15-year-old boy join the under-17 Brazilian national team and still pull off 8 goals, becoming the top scorer of the South American Championship despite his team's underperformance, well, they just had to sign him, and from there on out, things got really crazy really quick. The following month, he got his debut for Cruzeiro's under-20 team and opened his tally with 4 goals in his first match. Then, before he even had time to adjust to his new academy, he became the first amateur player in the history of the club to join the first team on their preseason tour. Fun fact, that tournament was right here in Portugal. The first team he ever faced was Belenenses, and the fans literally gave him a standing ovation at the end of the match. Eventually, he even faced Porto when they literally tried to sign him, but Cruzeiro, mere months after buying him for the price of a Toyota Camry, supposedly asked Porto for 1.75 million euros. That would have been a record signing for them at the time, so even though the likes of Inter were already making the rounds as well, they passed on it. I mean, come on, the kid had just turned 16, that would have been like the gamble of a lifetime. But moving on. 5 months after his arrival, he got his professional debut. That same month, he was on the bench as Cruzeiro won the Brazilian Cup for the second time in their history. 4 months after that, he was afforded 3 more appearances and scored in 2 of those. And man, by the time October rolled around, he had somehow already become a regular starter and damn near immediately went on a run of 17 goals in 10 matches. Where should I even start? This included 4 matches in the Supercopa Libertadores. On his debut, he scored a hat-trick. On the second leg of that match, he added 2 more goals. Then they faced Nacional from Uruguay. He scored the only goal of the first leg and then pulled a brace in the second, and somehow they still got knocked out. While all of this was going on, he also scored against every team he faced in the league except for Flamengo, and at the end of this unbelievable run, he put up his first masterpiece of a performance in a 6-0 win over Bahia, becoming the first player in the history of the club to score 5 goals in a single league match. It was a career-defining moment. For the first goal, a penalty. For the second, he put up the perfectly weighted pass to assist his teammate. For the third, he dribbled the keeper. For the fourth, he scored a header. For the fifth, another penalty. And for the sixth, well, he caught the keeper off guard, took the ball, and scored with an open net. Was it gonna get him some fair play award? Definitely not, but nobody cared because he was a genius. He was on the league's goal scorers podium at 16, and as Cafu said, that was the first time he showed the world he wasn't just a great player, he was a phenomenon. And let's just say he wasn't the only one impressed with the young boy. That same year, PSV scout Ernie Brandt had been in Brazil looking for their Romário replacement following his departure to Barcelona. If he happened to find someone with half of Romário's talent, it would already be considered a gigantic achievement. We're talking about a guy who scored 128 goals in 145 matches for PSV. But well, you know exactly where this is going. After seeing Ronaldo, he said, "I couldn't believe my eyes. I didn't believe them when he told me his age. It should be impossible for a 16-year-old to be that good. Finding him gave me life. I became a scout with a dream of one day finding someone like him." But still, that wouldn't be the year Ronaldo would finally leave to Europe. Before that, he would join Cruzeiro for a second season, completely taking over the Mineiro Championship with 22 goals in 19 matches, obviously taking the top scorer award and the title, racking up even more iconic moments, including a hat-trick against rivals Atlético Mineiro and one of the Copa Libertadores' most memorable goals of all time against Boca Juniors, which was enough to send everyone in the country into complete euphoria, pretty much peer pressuring the national team coach into calling him up for the World Cup at 17 years of age. Had he gotten even a single minute of game time, he would have become the 3rd youngest to ever play in a World Cup, with only Pele and Norman Whiteside ranking above him. However, even though Brazil took the title, the only time he stepped onto the pitch was to celebrate with his teammates. And though you could argue that was a bit disappointing, well, just the fact the name of a 17-year-old was in the team sheet of the most notorious national team of all time was enough to send everyone from AC Milan to Juve and Ajax after his signing, which meant PSV were now virtually out of the race. If not, for one little factor. During the tournament, Ronaldo had grown extremely fond of Romário, who he now saw as his mentor. And as you might imagine, when he asked Romário what he should do, of course he advised him to join his former team, arguing that they were the perfect stepping stone into Europe. Though, now looking back, it's hard not to argue that joining Ajax had a fair chance of going a little bit better. You know, considering that year they literally won the Champions League, you know, the one trophy Ronaldo never managed to win. Yeah. Regardless of whether he should have joined Ajax instead, at least this way we got to watch Van Gaal go on a tirade about how he didn't need Ronaldo because he had Kluivert. Well, Kluivert scored 22 goals that season. Ronaldo, well, the moment he arrived, they asked him how many goals he would score. He said 30. And if that seems unrealistic for an 18-year-old's first season in Europe, let me tell you, he really did end up not keeping his word. Instead, he scored 35. Despite this, unlike what you might imagine, upon arrival there were basically no fans waiting for him. While today a player like Vinicius Jr. can arrive from Brazil with a handful of goals to his name and already have 40,000 fans waiting, back then things weren't like that at all. Nobody knew who this kid was. Even PSV didn't exactly move mountains in order to make his adaptation to the new country any easier. He arrived at the airport pretty much alone with a piece of paper strapped to his chest with his name on it. Even when his family joined him in Eindhoven, he was stuck living with his mom and his girlfriend in the same apartment, which obviously caused some trouble, but still, somehow in football terms, his adaptation was, well, barely an adaptation really. He kind of just arrived and began dominating. After weeks of random pundits arguing that 6 million was too much for such a young unknown player, that he was inexperienced and that he would flop, well, Ronaldo scored 1 goal in his first game, 2 in his second and 3 in his third. Somehow he still came out defeated to Leverkusen in the third match, but his performance sent shockwaves across Europe. Many claim it was the most important moment of his career. After the match, many legends came out praising the young boy. Even Beckenbauer, the German titan known as Der Kaiser, who definitely isn't easily impressed, was clearly emotional that day, eventually claiming, "Today we've witnessed a new Pele." And let me tell you, not many people knew Pele as well as Beckenbauer, so when he said that, everyone listened. Similar to that situation, legendary Rudi Voller also made sure to say, "Never in my life have I seen an 18-year-old play like this." But what I always felt was funny about that quote was that the day he said that, Ronaldo was actually still only 17. As the months went by, Ronaldo quite simply didn't stop scoring, and by the end of the season, even if PSV had failed to take any trophies and had only managed a third-place finish, Ronaldo had managed to keep the one promise he had made to Romário. He had broken his record. Despite the fact Romário was easily one of the greatest of all time and nearly 6 years older than Ronaldo when he arrived at PSV, with 30 league goals, Ronaldo had outdone Romário's best ever tally across his 5 years with the club, and in fact, only one PSV player had ever managed to hit the 30-goal mark, and the last time any player had managed such numbers in the Eredivisie was a decade earlier, and his name was Marco van Basten. After a season like this, the big clubs became more relentless than ever. Inter especially made one bid after the other, trying to make up for the fact he had failed to secure his signing 3 years earlier, but PSV never budged. And eventually, trying to prove they didn't need Ronaldo, they went and signed someone they believe would be just as good. That year's Under-20 World Cup Golden Ball winner, Caio Ribeiro. If you don't remember him, well, that's probably because by the time he left Italy 2 years later, all he had managed to do was score a single goal. Kind of awkward, huh? And so, after a summer that saw even Pele give him a standing ovation in a match against England, Ronaldo went into his second season more explosive than ever, even scoring 4 goals in a single UEFA Cup match, and by the start of October, he was on 11 goals in 8 matches. However, it was then that the first red flags were raised. Having gone through a growth spurt that saw him grow 4 centimeters and put on 6 kilos, Ronaldo had been complaining since the beginning of the season that he felt off, and that month, the pain in his knees finally became too much, being sidelined for 24 days. As I once heard someone say, a Formula One breaks down more often than a Corolla, and looking at the way he played, the force he exerted upon his knees at every turn, it's unbelievable that his kneecaps didn't just turn to dust. Watching him in rehab was as heartbreaking as it was impressive. His determination was off the charts. In one of the videos you can hear him speak, and you know what he said? He said, "I need football. I need to score. This is my entire life. If I can't do this, Well, he never finished that sentence, but I think we can all imagine what he was about to say. Still, just as everyone began fearing the worst, he simply came back and quickly went on a streak that saw him score 8 goals in 5 matches, including a hat-trick on only his second start since the injury, but unfortunately, the roller coaster wouldn't end there. As December started, Ronaldo went down once more. After an MRI, the worst was confirmed. Besides the obvious inflammation of his knee, it had also calcified and surgery would be needed. In February, the procedure finally took place. He was warned to be careful and take his time in rehab, but instead, he kept on trying to force the staff to let him train with the team. And about 5 weeks later, right after PSV finally lost and dropped to second place on the table, he made his way back onto the team sheet. As he would say years later, a phenomenon can't fail, he can't have pain, and he can never stop scoring. Hearing this, you might assume it was the manager who tried to get him back on as soon as possible, desperate to keep his place at the top of the table, but in reality, it was quite the opposite. Ronaldo was the one putting himself in this position. He literally got into a confrontation with the manager, angry that he was refusing to play him, and with PSV soon losing the league to Ajax, once Ronaldo was only given 15 minutes of playing time in the cup final, he completely lost it and began looking for a way out of the club. With his performances in the Olympic Games the following month taking over the covers of every sports newspaper in the world, no matter how scary his fitness issues could look, given just how great he was, seemingly every club in the world was willing to risk everything for him, and soon a bidding war began between Inter and Barcelona. While Inter were still on the back foot, worried about the potential for injury, Barcelona were desperate to sign a top-class striker following repeated unsuccessful negotiations with Blackburn for Alan Shearer, who insisted the player was never ever leaving the club. And in the end, it all culminated in what looked like a skit straight out of a Mr. Bean movie, with Barcelona Vice President Joan Gaspar disguising himself as a waiter in order to get into the hotel where the Brazilian national team was staying at, so that he could get to Ronaldo and hand him a contract against the wishes of PSV, which he would literally sign on top of his bed. Once that was done, it was only a matter of getting PSV on board, which was pretty easy, considering that Barcelona were willing to pay a world record 15 million euros for the 19-year-old, who by then had also made sure to ruin his relationship with the club for good, calling the manager stupid and then claiming he would play for Barcelona for free. Ironically, 2 weeks after this, the all-time transfer record was broken again as Alan Shearer moved to Newcastle. I just wish I could have seen the faces of the Barcelona board once they got the news. Still, I'm sure they ended up not minding it too much, as by the end of the year, Ronaldo had been named FIFA World Player of the Year and had missed out on the Ballon d'Or by a single vote. As his own mom would say, by then, Ronaldo didn't belong to me anymore, he belonged to the world. That's how famous he had become. When it came to Inter, well, 1 year later, following some issues over contract negotiations at Barcelona, they finally got their man, breaking the all-time transfer record once again. But still, considering before they had dropped out of the transfer race for being afraid he was too injury-prone, it all became incredibly ironic considering that by the time he left the club 5 years later, he had only managed to play 1 full season for them, being sidelined for a total of 773 days. It was incredibly depressing to think that a year before his arrival at Inter, in an interview, he was asked what was his biggest fear, and his answer was, injury. An injured player is the saddest thing there is.